Hello and welcome again to a new episode of the KewCast. I'm John, joined again by my good friend Eddie. How you doing, buddy?
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's get the blood moving.
We've got a special guest today. Well, Zane Navratil is going to call in a little bit to talk about the Quang Duong situation, or Quang Duong. We'll ask him the correct pronunciation, but he'll have some insights on that. I'm excited to get that happening if we can get all the technical apparatus working together.
There's at least 12 screens in here at the moment.
There's so many screens. I don't know where to look. Are you real or a screen, Eddie?
One's as good as the other.
All right. But we do have a good show beyond that, too. I'm going to get into some poll results. And I did an experiment last week. I don't know if you saw the Honolulu paddle review, but I tested them by exposing them to sunlight to see how that changed. I
did notice when we were playing at Autry the other day that you had them sort of just out and about, which is something you wouldn't normally do. So I'm guessing that was part of your experiment? No.
That was the same day, and I kind of noticed some things then.
Okay.
So we'll talk about what does sun do to your paddles, and not just the Honolulus, but all kinds of other paddles too.
That'll be interesting.
And we got some paddles of the week to discuss. Not a huge segment this week like all of our previous weeks for the past month have been. We may not have time for the deep dive today, but we will get into some Q&A. So let's jump into it, Eddie.
All right.
We will save the QD session for Zane to talk about, but I had a poll that I put up a couple weeks ago, and basically I was asking people to, if they had to choose one paddle, and they can choose the power level from extreme power, but the trade-off being poorest control, or you had high power with kind of low mid control, or you had mid power with mid control, all the way down to low power with high control, right? Which of these paddles would they choose, assuming other things are equal in terms of big sweet spot and maximum spin?
So no brands, no models, just those two characteristics.
Yeah, exactly. So where do they fall? What would they choose in the spectrum from power and control? You know, there's always a little bit of a trade-off, or a lot of a trade-off, depending on which paddle, but assuming everything else is equal, good spin, big sweet spot, which of these would you choose?
I like it.
Yeah. So pretty overwhelming results. People mostly chose not the highest tier of power, but the next level. So high power with low mid control. So fewer pop-ups, etc. But sacrificing some control, obviously. So that's right where my preferences are too, and that's the paddle I have, as my main that I've been maining for 6 months now. The LAZR 24 vapor power, and there are several others in that grouping, in the low tier power category, but with enough control to satisfy me. Was that kind of where you like to sit there too? You've actually been playing a lot with the Franklin C45, which is even lower power. But
I would say so.
Yeah.
We're getting close to that sort of middle range.
Is that about where you like to be?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've mentioned many times before, I like to take a full swing at a ball. And sometimes those high power paddles, it's too much.
Yeah.
You're hitting out balls. You got to think about top spin on every shot. You can't just hit, blocking shots very hard. So yeah, I could be convinced into going into that mid power but mid control land.
Yeah. I was going to comment that even though the people we polled, so our listeners, which are paddle enthusiasts, even though they choose this level, the marketplace in general, I feel like chooses as most power as they can get. I mean, if you go look at any tournament today, you'll see mostly a sea of Yola Pro 4s,
right,
which are a higher tier power paddle. Although I'd say the control on those is pretty good for that tier of power, but it's definitely not as good as, let's say, the paddles we're playing with.
Yeah.
And recently, I put up I think a lot of people are buying the Honolulu all foams, so the J2NF
And where are you putting those?
Those are right there, just a little bit more power than the 11624 Vapor, but plenty of control on those things for the.
So still high power, mid control.
High power, mid control, right where our audience is polled at. So I think that is the most popular category for paddles. So yeah, if you didn't take this poll, let us know if your results are different and why. But yeah, pretty good spread there.
Yeah, the Vapor Pro Power, that alpha core, probably even a little bit less on the power scale than the paddle you're playing with, maybe even a little higher on control. So
Yeah.
coming down towards the middle of the spectrum a little bit.
Right.
But I get it. I love it.
Yeah. By the way, when we were setting up, Betty was looking for a tacky surface to prop his phablet up on. And
Hand me the Proton.
Get the Proton nanotech surface. That sucker is sticky.
You gonna add that to your list of criteria to measure?
Right. Can I hold up Betty's phablet? All right. Let's get on to the experiment. So the sun exposure. Now, what tipped me off for this is that Chris Olson texted me. And my apologies to Chris, the editors who were editing the Honolulu video, which I mentioned Chris in that video also. I think they misspelled his last name with an E instead of an O before the N. So I didn't catch it in the editing. And people were commenting. They're like, can't you get Chris's name right?
Totally different podcaster.
Apparently, I need some editing help. So, or review help, I should say. Editors are great. Anyhow, he texted and said, hey, John, have you noticed any of these Gen 4 paddles or all foam paddles heating up when you lay them in the sun for a bit? And that was the day after you and I played at Autry in the sun. And I was like, yeah, I do kind of feel like those Honolulus and all the paddles we were testing that day seemed pretty hot. And they did sound a little lower and deeper. And he was like, man, I left mine out in the sun for a few minutes and it sounded completely different. And I pulled one out of the house that was room temperature and it sounded higher pitched. And the one outside had a bassier tone. And he did some radar gun tests. If you go watch the Pickleball Studio podcast this week, he discusses that. And he was getting like 3 miles an hour increase.
That's
paddles
significant.
Sitting in the sun, which is very significant. So he's like, you want to test that with your Canon? I was like, yeah, I do. And this is like literally the day before, the day I wanted to release or record at least the Honolulu video. But I was like, I got to get this data. So spent that day collecting data and I put out a whole bunch of paddles, not just the Honolulus, but some other all foam paddles, some Gen 2 paddles, some Gen 3 paddles, and Gen 1 paddles, right? The whole gamut. And I wanted to do it all that day because temperatures were hot. This was a 95-degree day here in Colorado. And just collected a whole bunch of data. And ended up being very useful. So what you can see, if we look first, I'll show a image of my Q-core testing, kind of the scale of all the Q-cores. And these arrows here you can see are the jumps from the original paddle that was tested here in the laboratory at 70 degrees Fahrenheit and 50% humidity. And then the jump in power you see fresh off the table outside from the sunlight. Now, I do want to say that it was extremely hot that day, 95 degrees air temperature. The surface temperature, I brought my thermometer out there, it was at one point over 130 degrees on the surface where the paddles were sitting, which would be any kind of court. So if you're laying your paddle flat in the sunlight, it's going to, be that on a 95-degree day. They were so hot, it was difficult to touch them. It hurt to touch them. So you can see all of them.
So not the surface of the paddles, but the surface of the whatever table or whatever you were.
Well, I put the thermometer just there on the table,
Okay,
beside all the paddles, 130 plus degrees. It ranged from like 120 to 134, I think, that day. With it progressively got hotter. So it has to be a very hot day. And I do want to preface this, and I'll remind everybody at the end, don't do this. It's not a cheat code. It's not a way to have a powerful paddle. I mean, it lasts only as long as the paddle stays that hot, which is uncomfortable to actually hold, even on the handle.
That was my first question.
Right. And as soon as it starts cooling off, these go down. But you can see on these arrows, I get to the details in a minute, you can see these arrows, big jump. So most of them went from low power up into the red illegal zone where all the illegal paddles reside. So if you look at the Honolulu J2 and F and J2 FC Plus, it went from like 0.394 up to 0.468, which is in that red zone. You can see the biggest jump was the Proton Flamingo, which went from a 3.945 up to, like a 4.86, There's some smaller jumps too. So the Paddletech ALWC 12.7 just made a very small jump, but a jump nonetheless. So even Gen 1 paddles show the same trend. And, body Helix is over there, and it shows a similar jump as the Honolulu's, I'd say, in terms of magnitude. Now let's go to the next chart. So what I did was take all the paddles. I collected data before, so here in the laboratory. Then I took them outside, heated them all up, at least 2 hours in the sun.
Ooh.
Yeah. Brought them back as soon as we pulled it off the table, we stuck it on the cannon and started shooting it. Now, we noticed during that time, it took about, 20 minutes to record. During that time, we saw a progressive drop in the magnitude or the velocity of the ball coming off the paddle as it was cooling off. In real time, we could see the numbers diminish. So we just averaged all those numbers, and that was the increase we got. Let them sit overnight, retested them the following day. And I can say that every one of them returned to normal. None of them stayed powerful. None of them dropped in power. For the most part, it didn't do any damage. I will talk about some damage that did occur in a minute. So here, this bar chart shows what the increase is in terms of percentage from the original reading and what it ended up being after it cooled off and when it was hot. So you can see the biggest increase is a 23% increase for the Proton Flamingo. And then you got kind of this, I'd say all of these are cluster right around 15 up to 23%. So we've got the Honolulu J2 and F, the Carbon 2 True Foam Genesis, the Body Helix Flik, and the Honolulu J2 and FC Plus. Then there's quite a bit of a drop down to the next bunch. We've got, I'd say, a cluster from 7 to 4%. So we've got the Adidas Metal Bone EVA, the red one, the Selkirk Lux 2, the Paddletech ALWC 12.7, and the Gearbox GX2 Power. All of those, again range from 4 to 7%. And surprisingly, the Rhombus Ripple V2 R1.14 dropped in power. Yeah. So let's look at the next chart. And what I did is lump them by kind of the make of the paddles. So I'm calling them Gen 1 through Gen 4, and then another category for EVA carbon fiber cores. So that would be the Gearbox GX2 Power, that would be the Rhombus Ripple, and that would be the Adidas Metal Bound EVA. All of those use EVA foam in the core with carbon fiber in some form to keep the stiffness so it passes deflection and PBCOR. Right? I feel like that's a separate category from Gen 4. And I don't like the Gen categories, but to simplify things, Gen 1 is a cold press paddle, the ALWC. There's the only one in this. Gen 2 is a thermoformed paddle, so polypropylene honeycomb core with edge foam. Gen 3 is foam enhanced paddle, so thermoformed with an extra layer of foam, or the YOLO 4s, for example, are a good example of the Gen 3s. And then the Gen 4s are the all foam paddles, True Foam Genesis, the Body Helix Flik, the Honolulu's. Now, I didn't show the Vatics in here, but I'll say why in a second. All right, so you can see that the EVA carbon fiber paddles show the least increase in power when they're hot. And that makes sense. We were all texting together, some of the paddle reviewers, and Justin, Pickleball, etc. Justin mentioned that he didn't expect the EVA foam paddles to heat up as much in terms of firepower increase as the others, because EVA foam is more heat tolerant than expanded polypropylene EPP foam. So he thought that it would affect EPP foam, and his theory turned out to be true. The Metal Bone increased the most out of these three in this category. The Gearbox GX2 is in the middle, and the Rhombus Ripple actually decreased in power a little bit, which is pretty cool. So we know now that EVA doesn't respond the same way to heat as EPP, expanded polypropylene. Then we have a grouping of Gen 1 and Gen 2. Now, I need to expand my Gen 2 category. The only one I think that was Gen 2 was the Selkirk Lux 2. It'd be nice to have a bigger sample size than 2, but regardless, clearly you can see kind of an increased trend from Gen 1 to Gen 2, and then a big jump from Gen 3 to Gen 4. Those are lumped together up at the top there. So Gen 4 we can explain because the EPP foam gets softer in the heat. It becomes springier, and the PBCOR, as a result, jumps up. Gen 3 is surprising to me because that's honeycomb polypropylene core, You'd think it'd be closer to the Gen 2s especially, but there's a pretty massive increase. And I figured there'd be a closer gap between the Gen 1 and the Gen 3s until I started really kind of thinking about it. So what I'm thinking is going on here. And before I start down this, do you want to, any comments here, Eddie?
Well, it seems to me like the Gen 3s, the foam is really kind of the springs of the trampoline, right? And so when that gets springier, softer,
exactly,
you're going to see more power, right?
Yeah. And even though a lot of that foam in Gen 3s is EVA, which is more heat tolerant than EPP, it still softens up to some degree, and maybe it accentuates that trampoline effect, like you said. That's exactly what I was going to mention, is probably explains the big jump in Gen 3s. Another reason, and I think we're not picking this up in the Gen 2 category because of the small sample size, but I think the sealed nature of thermoformed paddles, where you have a strip of carbon fiber sealing it airtight inside, some of these paddles, I was pressing on them when they're hot, so much pressure inside those paddles because everything's heating up and just expanding. And for Gen 1 paddles, all that gas can escape out the sides. It's not sealed. For all the thermoform paddles that are sealed, that leads to some issues, that can lead to some issues. It definitely leads to increased power. So
that's wild.
Yeah.
Not surprising, but
no,
but very interesting.
Yeah. So back to the Vatics. So I was wondering, like, at 130 degrees, are any of these paddles going to be destroyed? And none of them were, except for the Vatics. So I actually tested one of the Vatics the day before. That was the first paddle I put out in the sun, but I put it out like at 4 p.m. and it got cloudy. So the surface temperature I was measuring with the thermometer in those partly cloudy conditions got up to about 110 degrees. And we ran the QCOR before and during the heat, and it increased moderately. And I was like, all right, tomorrow I'm going to do it in the direct sunlight and get a better sample. Well, I put them out the next day, and like I said, it got up to 130. One of the Vatics disbonded. The first Vatic I put out there disbonded, meaning the surface layers bubbled up away from that foam core, and it just literally looked like a bubble and destroyed the paddle. Even after it cooled off, there's just a big flappy surface layer. And I was like, all right, maybe that's a one-off. I made sure none of the others disbonded. They didn't. I put another Vatic. This is the V-Core, by the way, which is going to be released. It disbonded also. And I went back to check in 30 minutes. I was like, surely it's not going to be less than 30 minutes. It had bubbled up big time in that 30 minutes. So relatively short sun exposure. I don't know exactly when it happened. So sometime between 0 and 30 minutes, the second one was destroyed. So something about those Vatics, they're not heat tolerant. So I'll dissect those and see if I can find something about the bonding nature of them. But like I said, when it bubbled up, there was so much pressure in it because there's nowhere for those gases to escape with the thermoform paddle. I was worried that they were literally going to explode. That bubble was like sticking an inch off the core. And I'll show you the paddles when we leave, but they're destroyed. And I was worried. I was like, okay, that's that much pressure in here. I imagine that some of these others are going to disbond. And somebody left out there for 3+ hours, and none of the others had any disbonding at all. So the only issue right now has been with Vatic. But it's not to bash on Vatic. Clearly, there's an issue there. Disbonding has been one of my things that I've been worried about with the all-foam cores, the Gen 4 cores, because it is actually hard to adhere things to any kind of foam. And when I did the first review of the carbon true foams, that was my initial hesitation. I was like, if I had to guess that this paddle will fail in one way or another, it would probably be disbonding. They've proven to be extremely durable since that time. But I've been looking for any evidence of disbonding in all foam cores since. This is the first time we've discovered it, but it was a torture test. It's not often you're going to leave your paddle sitting on a hot court for 2 hours. But given that it happened within 30 minutes, yes, it was a very hot day, but I could see that actually happening, paddles sitting in a paddle rack, for example, during open play and, you're waiting in line. That might actually happen. So I reached out to Daryl, the owner. I was like, hey, this is what I found. Just FYI, we're going to be talking about it on the podcast today. So, I think it's set for launch in 2 weeks. Just something to be aware of. And I think he'll probably address it and figure out himself what's going on and under what parameters that can actually happen.
From what you were able to see, John, of these the Gen 3s and Gen 4 paddles, would you guess that it's, there's no effect, and at a certain temperature you get that full increase in power, or would you say it's more of a kind of a linear?
I think it's probably linear. So I can't figure exactly the increase that the Vatic had from those partly cloudy conditions the day before, where it was 110 degrees maximum surface temperature. It wasn't much. It went from it moved about as much as the ALWC did, so that up to 120, 130 degrees Fahrenheit surface temperature, they increased a lot more. But I imagine, you start to see, so somewhere between 110, 130, you start to see big increases. And and like I said, all of these do go back to normal unless it's broken with this bonding. Those are ruined forever, but all the others returned to the same firepower levels. There was no disbonding, no permanent damage. But I still wouldn't recommend doing that with any paddle. There's always going to be a risk that the adhesion between the foam and surface layers is not as good or whatever. There's always a risk of damage if you do leave them out in the sun for that long.
So for people in colder climates, will you be selling a Johnkew branded paddle warmer?
I wonder. Again, do not do this. This is not a good idea, and it doesn't make any sense because you're not going to be holding a 130-degree paddle in your hand for very long, and it's going to be cooling off.
But what about the flip side? If you're in a colder climate and it's 50 degrees out, I got to imagine that foam gets pretty dense.
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe we'll do some refrigerated experiments. I like it. All
Very
right.
interesting.
Yeah. Any other comments, Eddie?
No, it's like I said, not surprising really, but good to see some data surrounding that.
Yeah.
I saw you with the paddle the other day, sort of leaned up against the fence. I'm like, well, that's not something John normally does, but all makes sense now.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the traditional advice has been keeping your paddle in freezing temperatures is really bad, but heat isn't so bad. And yes, freezing temperatures are bad for a paddle, but now we know that heat can affect a paddle for sure, and there is some evidence that some of these paddles can break with heat exposure.
You didn't see any deformation of the form following, KewCore testing?
Of the deformation of the what?
Of the foam.
Oh, no. It all
just restored
exactly
back to
the same. Yeah, and the KewCore numbers went back, within margin of error levels, just right back where they started from. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. What time is it? All right. We've got 18 minutes until we call Zane.
All right.
So let's jump into paddles of the week. You think we can cover this in 18 minutes?
No problem. We've already talked about both paddles.
Right. Which one do you want to do first?
Let's go Body Helix first.
Okay. So we're going to talk about two current releases. The Body Helix just came out 2 days ago or yesterday. Very recent release.
It's today.
Is it today?
Yeah.
And the GRUVN's been up for pre-sale for a little bit now. So both of these are available. GRUVN for pre-sale, Body Helix for real sale. Let's go to the Body Helix. I just wanted to kind of compare these two as options for all foam paddles, Gen 4 paddles that are both very powerful and on the cheaper side for this category.
Yeah, if there's a more powerful paddle, there's not too many more out there that I would say are more powerful. These are both bazookas.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what about the Body Helix? Let's start with the Body Helix first. So I did at the section. I'm going to do a review of both of these similar to what we're discussing today.
Oh, great.
It'll probably come out on Friday. But I did do a dissection of it. So we've already seen the x-ray, and so there's no surprises here. But you can see exactly what the x-ray showed. So dozens of holes in the middle that go all the way through. They're not connected in the center. And you have the band of edge foam, this yellowish edge foam, going all the way down around the edges and into the handle. And yeah, this is expanded polypropylene. I will say that it feels a little softer, even here in 70 degrees, than the Carbon True foam did. So somehow they were able to come up with
That's kind of what it feels like, just pressing on the face even.
Yeah. was like a less dense version of which explains the power, right?
Yeah.
And probably less density equals less weight. So the swing weight, twist weight, and static weight are all pretty ideal. So static for an elongated paddle, 7.9. Swing weight, 113 for an elongated paddle, super low. Twist weight, 6.0. So that's right on average, I'd say. Lower balance point to 23.8. This one was approved right at 0.43 PBCOR. On my QCOR testing, it is right at that boundary. I have not narrowed it down because I just switched to the lifetime ball as much as I had with the holeless Franklin ball, but mine puts it just in the red, so over in that potentially illegal zone. But I still, like I said, I'm still maneuvering that boundary around.
So it is as hot as you can get.
As hot as you can get, yeah, without being clearly illegal. Is that about where you feel?
Oh yeah. Yeah, when I get an overhead with this, that ball's just gone.
Okay.
If I could just get a few more, that would be great. The paddle has great power, but also great dwell time. I feel like the ball sticks to the face. It's got good grit.
Oh my God, the grit on this is
Yeah, so
intense.
there's a lot going for this. I think with a little perimeter weighting, you could boost up that twist weight a little bit. I am looking forward to a couple of new shapes coming from Body Helix with this technology. A standard paddle, but also a hybrid shape.
Yeah.
Those will be really interesting because it'll give you that enhanced sweet spot, hopefully.
Yeah, for sure. Let me see the undissected one. I think this is a 5.3-inch handle or 5.25. It feels about like the same length as the Honolulu J2 series to me. Their standard handle.
Maybe a touch longer.
Maybe a touch longer, but I mean it's manageable for two hands. But definitely I have to put a finger up on the back of it. Before I ask you if you feel like you can control it, let me see that side of the dissected paddle. One thing I love about the paddle, especially for its price point, is it's what is it, 190 before code, which for a Gen 4 paddle is great. Fully molded PU handle, not even PU pallets, but they just went all the way around that sucker.
I like it.
The handle does feel great on this. All right, Eddie, do you think you can control this paddle?
I do. Now that I see the core like that, John, that all those holes sort of give credence to the feeling that I get, which is a lot of consistency. I don't feel like there's a hot spot on the paddle. It's very predictable, very consistent. It's very powerful. I mean, you do have to think a lot about what you're doing when you play with this paddle.
Yeah.
You can't hit a flat ball with no spin because that ball is just going to fly.
Yeah.
You got to put top spin on the ball.
Yeah.
And when you can do that, utilize the spin, the ball's going to dip, and it's going to dip with some heat.
Yeah, for sure. The spin on these is outrageous for both reasons we just discussed. The dwell time and the grit is pretty extreme. So, yeah, it is. It's about as spinny as you can get legally and about as powerful as you can get legally, which is a good combination for name people. I can't speak to whether or not I think I could control it. I think I would have a difficult time, especially through the transition zone. But being injured, I can dink around, but I don't have any competitive play with it. So I don't know yet, but I'll lean on your opinion for the review as well.
One thing I do struggle with, John, is getting top spin on my two-handed backhand.
Okay.
It's not as powerful spin as I would like it to be, and sometimes with those balls go out with this paddle. So it's just something for me to be mindful about when I'm using this paddle, is just to either tune down the power or really think about more top spin, particularly on those two-handed backhands.
Okay. Is that an Eddie thing or the paddle thing, you think?
It's something that I think every user of this paddle is going to want to think about, is just how to maximize top spin.
Okay. Yeah.
Otherwise, the power is just going to overwhelm everything.
Gotcha. All right. Well, let's move on to the GRUVN. How would you compare head-to-head the firepower of the GRUVN to the...
It's going to be close. I don't know if you've tested this, John, but the power is going to be right up there. If it's not on the line, it's pretty close to it.
Okay.
In the hot spot that this paddle has.
Yeah. Okay, so it's smaller sweet spot for you?
I would say that there is a spot on here where rebound is quite fierce.
Okay.
And it's a very tight spot compared to the Body Helix.
Okay, so very focused level of power in that area, and then a pretty quick drop off. How would you compare it to, it's not as bad as the Gearbox Pro Power Elongated?
That's a interesting comparison. Maybe not too far off in terms of the size of that hotspot. The feeling's a little bit different.
Okay.
But yeah, that's I would say in terms of power output in a concentrated area, it's similar to what you'd get in a gearbox.
Okay. Like I said, I've been injured, but I have played with it at a cursory level. I didn't feel it to be that tight of a sweet spot. Definitely tighter than the Flik. To me, the overall firepower felt a little noticeably lower than the Flik, but still elite power. I put it close to probably like a Yola Pro 4 level power.
Like one notch lower than what we're seeing here. Right?
Yeah. Sweet spot didn't feel bad, but noticeably a little smaller than the Flik.
Yeah.
But I like the response that the GRUVN gets. It feels really great, especially when you hit the center of that sweet spot. But even all around the paddle, it is predictable. I feel like I don't know. I need to play with them side by side. I was about to say I feel like I might be able to control it a little better, but than the Flik because it's a little less firepower. But I can't really say that yet.
I played a little bit with an old friend, Esteban, today. We played some singles at Lifetime, and I let him use both paddles. And his description of the GRUVN was that it was touchy.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? Like it has a good touch? Or he's like, no, it's like sometimes I feel like I'm getting more from the paddle than I'm desiring, and then other times less.
All right.
That's me paraphrasing him, but I think that's sort of what he was getting after.
It's a temperamental paddle, like an ornery child.
It's not as unwieldy as some. I'm probably over exaggerating the sweet spot difference because we're kind of doing a head-to-head comparison here, but it's a very solid feeling paddle.
Yeah, I do like the solid feel. The texture is notably less extreme than the Flik. Well, how'd you feel about the spin on this?
Noticeably less.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Dwell?
Dwell, I would say it's, it feels like it's got a little bit less dwell than the body Helix, but that could just be perception. It has a very stable, solid feel, a lot like the Honolulus that we played with last week in terms of that just sort of stable, firm feeling, which I like.
Yeah. How would you compare the sweet spot compared to the Honolulus?
I would say less than the Honolulus. Those were really outstanding paddles.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I don't have the stats up here for the GRUVN, but a little heavier swing weight. The price is similar to body Helix, although if you buy these, caveat, they did come in at 0.44 USAP PBCOR approved, which means they will be sunset in May 1st of next year. So you've got about 10 months to play with this before you're not able to play with it in a competition. But GRUVN is providing it. If you do buy one of these, they will provide you with a 70% off discount until that May 1st deadline for any paddle in the GRUVN lineup.
That's
so you
great.
can play with this for 10 months and then swap it out for 70% off the next one, which probably will be 0.43 approved. And he's working on several varieties of this, and probably they will be eventually approved. So just something to keep in mind. So there is that issue that they will be sunset next year. Also, I did want to talk about, I think the GRUVNs have a 6-month warranty versus the 3-month warranty on the body Helix. Now, I did talk with Fred, the owner of body Helix, and he said that they will be adjusting that for 3-month. I checked on the website, and it still says 3-month warranty on the Fliks, but the idea was he would be bumping that up to 6 months, I suppose. He didn't say exactly, but he said he will adjust it up.
I would expect both of these paddles to be quite durable. I haven't had any issues. I've certainly played with the body Helix longer and have seen really no difference in performance over time, and I would expect the same from the GRUVN.
Yeah. What we've seen with the expanded polypropylene is that, it can't crush in the same way that cellular or honeycomb polypropylene can, because that's relying on the straightness of the honeycomb walls. It's not the same thing with expanded polypropylene. They're expanded beads, so we know they're not going to crush in the same way, at least. And then, that Flik was put out in the sun in 130-degree surface temperature for 2 to 3 hours and did not balloon up, or no damage occurred to it. So I do think they will both be durable, like you said.
I'd be curious to hit this thing after 130 degrees of exposure.
Yeah. So the body Helix, I showed it in the chart earlier, but it jumped up to like past Gearbox Pro Power elongated, broken in power levels, you know, and that I didn't mention it before, but that Adidas Metal Bone EVA Red, it started at like a 0.50, which is at the very edge of my chart, and with that increase, it went off the chart. That thing was the most powerful paddle I've tested, even stock. I haven't even played with it that much, so wow, that thing is
that is nuts.
So powerful.
More powerful than the Hush.
More powerful than the Hush. The Hush is not given as much, the highest scores as I think they should be, because the Hush to me just felt like an absolute rocket, and then with that crazy spin you get, it's deadly.
Yeah.
But it's showing as like illegal, but not as illegal as I thought they would be. For example, the Diadem Vice is much more illegal, according to QCOR estimates, then.
Must be something about its unique construction that's throwing off your measurements.
I think so. All right, Eddie. So I also wanted to, I almost forgot, but I also wanted to show, I'm working on the section of the GRUVN paddle. Now, do you remember the X-ray? It showed like diagonal lines in the all foam, and I couldn't figure out what in the world was going on. And you asked me, and my guess was that they were using alternating densities of foam. And then Kevin got on in the comment section and said, "Nice guess, but wrong." So I've been wondering what in the heck's going on. So I started dissecting it yesterday. I didn't finish, but check out what's going on here. So clearly a different type of foam. Two types of foam here. So we do have this black expanded polypropylene.
Yeah.
But then we've got a white foam here, which I think is also expanded polypropylene. It's beady like it. But what we're seeing is, I think, and I'm going to verify this with more dissection, but I think we've got tri-layer, like a Neapolitan ice cream or a layer cake. So we've got the black layer on either sides and then a white layer in the center, and it's picking up on the sides here and here in the middle of the cut. So interesting. And I still don't know what would be giving it those linear diagonal lines, but I will work my best before the video comes out on Friday.
The white foam does seem to have some striations in it.
Are you seeing striations there?
Yeah, a little bit.
Here, I'll let you look closer up. It might be from my saw blade.
Like you can see there's some lines here, there's some here.
Okay. Yeah, maybe my saw blade, because I had to come at different angles, and then change the angle. But I think a cross-section cut through the middle of the paddle will tell me whether or not we're dealing with 3 layers here. And I'll play around with removing the surface layer, trying to remove the surface layer to get a better idea of what those diagonal lines are. But yeah, pretty cool. We haven't seen this white expanding foam yet either.
Does seem much more dense than the black.
More dense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that too. Okay. Interesting.
So is this the same construction as the GRUVN that the LAZR?
Good point. So this is the Move-In 16 HD, and it is the same construction as the LAZR, just a different face layup. This one failed PBCOR. The other one came in at 4.4. This one came in somewhere above that. So he's resubmitting these move-ins and to see if he can get these to pass. And otherwise, they're exactly the same in the guts.
Got dust all over me now.
Yeah, hopefully no carbon fiber splinters. All right, well, we have a special guest on the KewCast today. So Zane Navratil stopped in because he is the expert on all things professional pickleball. And I've just been wondering what in the world is going on with the details behind the QD being fired through UPA-A, so he can't play, or his contract was terminated, I should say, for the PPA. So some behind the scenes stuff. Hopefully you can give us some details. But, I know that he was, by the way, I'll link to your video on this. You always do a great job. You posted the same day as when this happened. But you gave some really good insight. Hopefully we can get a little more details. But you're saying basically that the writing was on the wall. QD or Wang Yung, Quang Duong, was doing a lot of things that kind of really ticked off the PPA. And eventually they gave him the $50,000 fine, and now they've terminated his contract. But what I can't figure out is kind of the details. Like, okay, yeah, he was violating his contract terms by doing some things at Vietnam in terms of his clinics and in terms of playing in other unsanctioned tournaments or tournaments that were sanctioned outside of PPA. But can you fill us in, Zane, on a few of the details?
Yeah. So, it's certainly an interesting one. And as you mentioned in that video, like I have, I think some additional insights since hitting record after immediately seeing the news. Like, John, I saw it on my phone, and before I even read the entire headline, I went over to my chair. This is the most impromptu video I've done, I think, ever. But for context, Wang Yun, Quang Duong, QD, apparently all of those are wrong according to my YouTube commenters too. So we just can't win on that one. But we all know who we're talking about, okay? He has been back and forth to Vietnam a bunch of times. Obviously, he's Vietnamese. He's born in Vietnam. Like, he's a superstar over there. He's got the SciPic deal. He's got the Wika deal. He's been back and forth a million times, posting on his Instagram story and Instagram accounts different things that he's been involved in. And a few months ago, there were a few events that really more accurately probably looked like tournaments. And a lot of players have gotten clinics, they've gotten events, these pickleball related activities to slide, because when they're not really competing with the UPA historically hasn't really cared all that much if you're doing clinics, meet and greets, whatever. But in a lot of contracts, technically, you are supposed to get approval for that. And one thing that is certain, they do not F around with exclusivity surrounding contracts and exclusivity surrounding tournaments in particular. So, that's a gray area of whether or not he has participated in tournaments. I don't pretend to know the actual facts of there, but based on things that he's posted, he's been in Vietnam on courts with lots of people watching. Like, there's a lot of smoke. I won't go into the full depth on that. They fined him $50,000 and suspend him for MLP and PPA. And that was like a little over a month ago, right? So that happens. He gets hit with the largest fine since Andre Daescu's sticky paddle stuff. And he's back at it. He goes to Vietnam again, I think sometime between that fine and now. Nothing happened, or nothing that he was punished for publicly happened there. And then he's back in Vietnam currently, instead of being at the Beer City Open mid-season tournament. The facts surrounding that were, from what I understand, he had a nose surgery, and he goes to Vietnam to get that done. Seems like a minor surgery. Very, very convenient that while he's there, he is posting that he's opening these clubs. He's on his first business trip to Hanoi with his brother Bao. And doing these, I saw promoting camps, clinics, whatever. And then we got the ban hammer from the UPA. They just terminated his contract for repeated violations. And that's the backstory. That's how we got to this point.
Okay. So before we get into whether or not you think who has the most leverage, the UPA-A or Quang Duong and his father Duke, you probably saw already, but we didn't see you respond to this on your original video. But Quang Duong did fire back at the decision on his Facebook, saying, and I'll just read this. He said, "Oh man, it's not like I was out chasing money or anything. I had a minor nose surgery. I officially asked for time off from the Mad Drops over 2 months ago to recover from July 1st to the 15th. Resting in recovery at Vinpearl, and just happened to meet some fans. Didn't break any rules. Bottom line, they tried to lock me into a contract extension, and when that didn't work out, this is what came of it." So, do you have any thoughts on that?
That's pretty convenient. I have to say, I'd love to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm sure he did have a nose surgery. I don't doubt that. It is very convenient to have a lot of these things, lined up at the same time there as this. And if it was a minor nose surgery, it seems like that could have been done, at a time that wasn't the Beer City Open and wasn't the mid-season tournament. I didn't see that statement. I feel like it's a little bit too convenient, in my opinion.
Okay. So Zane,
Now, I think
Go ahead.
an interesting question that I've been thinking about since I came out with that video, and sorry to commandeer your guys' podcast. My apologize.
No, I love
My
it.
apologies.
Right.
An interesting question is, I think there's two things that are true. That could be true. I can't think of anything else. So please tell me, Eddie and John, if you can think of anything else. One, these guys thought they were going to get away with it. That's option number one. Two, they're very, very dumb and did all this and just didn't think of it. Three, they knew that this would happen and did not care, and it was a business decision. I don't see any other. What's number four? Right? What else? What else is there?
Oh well, maybe fans just materialized while he had his nose surgery, and it just happened. But I'll let Eddie go here. What are your thoughts, Eddie?
Well, it's like a lot of things in business, right? There's some degree of risk, and you do some analysis of that risk, and you say, okay, if the worst thing happens, can I afford it? And I think in this case, they made that decision, and maybe it backfired. Maybe they don't care about the backfire, but I have to think that sort of cost benefit was done, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we all know they're not dumb, and
Right.
you know, I think they were taking calculated risks and knowing that if eventually that everything was terminated and ended up like this, they would be just fine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm coming down on number three. Like, I think that they were prepared for this and think it's the best career move in my opinion. I don't think he'd be posting all of this stuff if he didn't think it was going to result in the termination here. So to me, I'm starting to think that this was, poking the bear enough to just get out.
Okay, so not just a calculated risk, but they actually wanted out. Yeah,
there's
I
some
could very
risk
well
in
be
that
wrong
too, though. I mean, a lot of his success in Asia and Vietnam is because of the success he's had here on tour. And so without that backing, what happens to his future? He's got a long future ahead, but without MLP, without PPA, what happens to that?
Yeah, that was the next topic I was going to bring up, Zane, to get your thoughts. I mean, it seems in the short term that maybe Quang Duong and his father, Duke, have more leverage than the PPA here because he's got, I think, probably the biggest paddle contract with Cypic out there. Maybe not the biggest, but one of the biggest. He's got these clinics and he's opening up business opportunities in Vietnam. And by the way, Cypic is a Vietnamese company. So they're rolling in potential over there. They don't need the PPA currently, but how long will that last? I mean, there's no competition over there for QD like you can get here. And how long are people going to be as interested in him if he's not playing and beating some of the best players in the world who are now at the PPA?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, right? Because I think of him as a Shohei Ohtani type of deal. Shohei Ohtani was unbelievable in the Japanese baseball league, but a few years ago before he came to the States, probably hardly anybody outside of the U.S. would have known him. I was at a Brewers game in Milwaukee, where I'm originally from, last week, and they played the Dodgers, and half of the stadium in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, was wearing Shohei Ohtani jerseys. Right, so he's limiting that potential international superstar stardom, but I think in the short term, without a doubt, he is going to make more money in Vietnam, capitalizing on his current U.S. success. Like the next 2-3 years, he'll be raking in the dough, but limiting that upside potential in my opinion. So in the short term, I just can't imagine how this is a bad decision financially for him. The interesting thing too is they live here in the States. Are they going to go play APP? Like, I think they probably understand that there has to be some degree of U.S. success. But my guess is on some Asian tour emerging that they might have some insight into ahead of time, or just playing the one-off events. I don't know what's up with global sports these days, or, playing certain Australian events and sticking around Asia. But like, why not move back to Vietnam if this is all part of the plan too? I mean, kind of more I think about it, the more questions I have surrounding this stuff. And I think that it's an incomplete story.
Yeah. I mean, do you know the contract was terminated, but does that mean he can't play at all? Is he banned from all PPA events?
So yes and yes. So there's yes, he absolutely will not be in any PPA events anytime soon for two reasons. If you're not contracted, and you're inside the top 50 players, you cannot play a PPA qualifying event, and you can't get into main draw right away. So he's ranked too high to play PPA without a contract. That's reason number one. And reason number two, I don't know what the swearing policy is on your podcast. Mine's pretty liberal, so I'll keep it. I'll keep it pretty tame. He's on their crap list. All right. It's him next to Jill Braverman and like maybe Rob Nunnery. Okay. Like he's on the outs over at the PPA UPA, and they don't need to let him play. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But like the ranking thing is one thing. That's the certain reason why he can't play. The other reason is they probably don't like him at this point and don't want him in their tournaments, and they have the power to make that happen.
Yeah. I mean, how bad does this hurt the PPA?
I think it does. I think it hurts both sides, to be honest. Like, because the PPA Asia, like QD could have been their superstar for that, right? But instead, the second largest market in pickleball, and I'd love to know your guys' YouTube analytics too. Like Malaysia and Vietnam are right up there with Canada now. Philippines really close behind. Singapore even, but he really could have been a huge asset for the UPA. I'm sure they're not happy that this has happened. I'm sure they wanted to partner with him, utilize him, all of that stuff, but you can't partner with somebody that's going to continuously allegedly break their contract.
Do you think that Jack Sock and Jeannie Bouchard had anything to do with them coming down on QD? They were just like, all right, our pros are not showing up at MLP events. We've got to do something here. So let's make an example out of QD.
Yeah, I think QD was probably the most egregious. I also don't know if there was some sort of, I don't know what Jack and Jeannie's contracts look like. If I was a pro tennis player signing a UPA contract last year, I would have negotiated that I won't compete in anything pickleball related, but if there's a tennis opportunity where I can make $100,000 or whatever it is, like, you got to let me do that. So I'd be surprised if they signed a contract that limited their ability to play tennis. So I don't think that the non-compete thing is an issue, but like the skipping a P or an MLP event, I think, is an issue. So it's less clear to me whether that would have been a contract violation. You know what I mean?
Okay. So there might be a contractual clause that allowed that.
It seems to me more like an unexcused absence than it is like a blatant contract violation for Jack and Jeannie. Now, I do think that they need to be punished. If you don't have a good reason for not showing up to an MLP tournament, yeah, you need to be punished.
Okay. That all makes sense. So before we let you go, Zane, I was wondering, what did it feel like to be playing next to Megan Duzan and AJ Kohler? I didn't even realize they were boyfriend and girlfriend until I heard Dave Fleming mention it. But yeah, she got some good shots off on him. Was it awkward?
She was she was playing well, and she was lighting lighting AJ up. Yeah, that was Megan was like more fiery than I'd ever seen her in that match too. Like, normally she's pretty like soft spoken, not super loud, but that one she was very, very competitive, and I wouldn't say it was uncomfortable or anything. Like, it was certainly entertaining. I love it when people stir the pot and it's not me for once. So
Wait, run this back. Did she body bag her boyfriend?
Oh, yeah. Just
yeah,
like
she got
full
it pretty
swing,
good.
and he was sitting forehand and just pegged him right in the left shoulder, and he laughed it off. But there was a moment there. I was like, "Whoa,
nice.
That's not going to go over well."
Yeah, he laughed it off nicely.
Yeah, she did have a different demeanor than usual. You know, she seemed more focused and more kind of cutthroat, which I think is great from Megan.
Yeah, I feel bad. I really, really choked that one too. Down the end, we had some match points. I had a couple of pretty high thirds and also a put away volley on match point that I chunked in the net to win it. Yeah, that was rough. I ruined it for Megan.
Back, Zane, and talk about what it's like to play under enormous pressure in the pro leagues. So you handle it better than most, for sure. Eddie, do you have any questions for Zane?
Zane, before we let you go, let's put a bow on this. Let's say Big Daddy Duke is out of the picture and QD comes to you as, you know, he wants a mentor, he wants some advice. I mean, what do you tell him? How do you move forward from this?
Ooh. Wow, that is a very, very difficult question. I would say winning takes care of a lot. So obviously continue to focus on being the best possible player that you can be. And I would, if I'm him, I'm probably going to see what the PPA wants to do, what sort of deal can be made there, and assess that. I think and it also depends on what he wants, right? You know, there's probably contradictory things happening. My guess is that QD wants to be the best possible pickleball player that he can be. And to do that right now, there's no doubt in my mind, you have to be on the UPA, MLP, PPA tour to be the best player in the world. I'm assuming that's what he wants. He also wants to make money. And I think that those two things are slightly at odds given his current situation. He'd have to weigh which is more important to him and then base a decision off of that.
Sorry, Zane. I said maybe he's going to cash out in the next 3 years in pickleball and then move back to tennis.
Hey, he always could. I think he was supposed to play tennis at Harvard or something like that. Yep.
Sorry, Zane, I cut you off. What were you going to say?
Nothing important.
All right, you got anything else for us before we part ways?
No, I'm stoked to be on here. It's an honor. It's always fun, John, when I've got you on our podcast to tell us all about this, all about the paddle world. And happy to share my perspective on what's going on in the pro scene.
It's fantastic. It's fantastic to have you on. I always wanted to, and honor is ours. And Zane, hope you have a great day, man.
Yeah, take it easy, guys.
Eddie, we do not have time for Q&A. I was going to talk about some really interesting findings that my engineer friend Keith, who helped me out with my PBCOR stuff, he moved on to measuring vibration frequencies with an accelerometer on paddles, and is finding some really interesting information, particularly about what happens when you put a slice cap or put weight on the bottom of your handle. So a little teaser for next week. We'll kick that into the next week, but let's jump into Q&A. I'll start. I pulled in one. You've had some others. So the first one comes from Mr. Panthers 23. He writes, my main right now is the Vapor Alpha Pro Power. Is it worth getting the J2K FC Plus or the NF? Would it be much of an upgrade? Seems like I would gain some spin and maybe a bigger sweet spot, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. All right, so my thoughts, and I'll go to you next, Eddie, but I would say that if he has the Vapor Alpha Pro Power, it's brand spanking new because that one just went out on pre-sale. So if you're liking it, I would definitely stick with it and not move over to the Honolulu because both are great options. Yeah, they play a little bit differently, but I'd put them more or less in the same firepower category. The Honolulus are a slight step up in terms of firepower, particularly from the Alpha Pro Power, but nothing that is revolutionary is going to change your game entirely. Yes, the J2Ks, the Honolulus have more spin, but again, nothing that's, going to be totally game changing. So unless you're really not liking your Alpha Pro Power, I'd say stick with it until you lose enough grit that you're no longer happy with it, and then move over to Honolulu. Because I feel like, yes, there are some upgrades for sure on the Honolulus. I'd say the sweet spot's at least comparable, maybe slightly even larger on the Honolulus. I feel like the feel is, if you like that Gen 4 foam feel, then the Honolulu's going to feel a little better. There are some perks, but there's also some subjective things that some people are going to like one better than the other, and you may like the Vapor Power. It's Alpha Vapor Power. It's an excellent paddle. By no means is it inferior to the Honolulus. I think it's just kind of lateral moves for each. What do you think, Eddie?
100% agree, John. And like most things on this show, for me, it boils down to feel, right? The sort of unquantifiable.
Yeah.
The Vapor Pro Power has kind of a bouncier, boingier feel to it, more so than the original Vapor, but more so than the Honolulus as well. The Honolulus feel more firm, more dense. And so, you're again, like you said, you're not going to gain anything on performance, but there's a noticeable difference in feel. And I would say if you love the feel of the Pro Power, I'd stick with it. If you're looking for something different, then maybe something else is in order.
There we go. All right.
John, here's a question from last week's podcast. And it gets back to your switch to the Franklin, from the Franklin to the Lifetime ball. And that is, how much variability is there between a ball hitting a paddle on the hole versus between the holes? How much further would a ball fly? I assume this is the biggest uncontrollable variable in a shot.
So I don't have the capacity to measure directly the difference between hitting on the hole versus between the holes, but what I'm seeing is a little more variability, particularly with, let's say, the Franklin X40 with holes versus without holes. So if I'm firing and holding the inbound velocity constant, then the outbound velocity shows greater variability for the ball with holes than without. Now, clearly, it comes off with less velocity for the ball with holes because it's not as springy as that without. But if you look at the spread on the ball coming off in terms of miles per hour, it's bigger for the one with holes. And that's my original experiment. Now, the reason why I went to the Lifetime ball with holes is because there's less variability in that than there is with any other ball with holes that I've tested. Yes, the variability is bigger even for the Lifetime ball than it is for the Franklin holeless ball, but I'm willing to accept that little bit of uncertainty there and more variability in terms of the results, because I feel like I was getting nervous that the ball without holes was providing data that didn't match the way a pickleball plays on the court. Now, it's very close. The results have been very close between these two balls, but there are a couple of outliers here and there that I didn't feel were correct for the ball with holes. There's still a couple of outliers with the Lifetime ball, but everything seems to be lining up a little bit more realistic as to how I know the paddles play. So there's that. But yeah, I don't have to measure that distinct difference between hitting on the hole versus in between the holes. I'd need a piston cannon, which shoots the ball with a piston rather than straight air, and you can actually determine which part of the ball in advance, exactly which part of the ball down to millimeters is going to strike the paddle. So I can't even give a guess, but yeah. That's my hindrance on measuring that directly.
Got a question from Jeremy Liu that I have a follow-up question to. He asks, is there a way to measure control? And I'm going to paraphrase that by saying, what is a control paddle other than not a power paddle?
So is it the antithesis of power? Is that
right?
Yeah, okay.
What are your thoughts on that?
Control is much harder than power to measure objectively because there are more attributes going into control. So sweet spot size is probably the biggest part of control. And you can have big sweet spot sizes on power paddles. So clearly amplitude comes into it, ball response comes into it. But sweet spot in itself is almost impossible to objectively measure. We all want to be able to show a heat map of the surface of a paddle to measure in area what square inches of the sweet spot is, but it's elusive because the sweet spot is not only how fast the ball the paddle returns energy across its face, but also where the vibration frequencies, where it feels best to hit that paddle, And if the paddle's sending bad vibrations into your hand, even if it's returning a lot of energy all over the face, it's going to feel like it has a small sweet spot. It's going to feel awful to play with. So there's many aspects of sweet spot, and sweet spot's not the only thing that goes into control. So we have more things, and a lot of those are subjective, the dwell time. Some people like a more dwell time paddle, others not. Some people like a stiffer paddle, others not. Some people are going to most people think a softer paddle. So a more plush paddle is more control oriented, myself included, but other people are the opposite. There's a lot of subjectivity that goes into that. What do you think?
Absolutely, there is some spin and other factors as well, right?
Thank you. Spin is an important one.
For me, swing weight translates into control, right? So if my hands feel slow, I'm more likely to push a ball to the right. I'm a right-hander, so my paddle's slow to the ball. Mm-hmm. So that's affected control as well. Yeah. How heavy a paddle is. So there's, like you said, there's lots of factors. But I'm thinking of sort of the continuum of paddles that we look at all the time. We have power, all court, and control. Maybe control's not the right word for those paddles on the lower end of
I think you're right.
The spectrum.
I think you're totally right. It's a valid observation, because some of the control paddles have less control than some of the all court paddles, and maybe with some of the newer power paddles. Absolutely, some of the control have less control than the newest Gen 4. Honolulu, for example, has more control than probably any Gen 1 paddle, which most of those are lumped into the control category.
Yeah.
That's a great observation. I like that.
So let's rename it.
Let's do
to not power.
Not power.
Unpower.
Define it by what it's not. I like it. Unpower.
All right. That's all I have for questions, John.
Okay. Well, we've got our episode then, Eddie. That's been a lot of fun. I'm glad that you're back for
the wrap.
Second time in a row in the studio.
I haven't been sick for days. Let's keep it that way.
Let's keep it that way. Thanks, Eddie.
All right.